Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Makbool with you once again at BTV World. In today's show, we will be talking about the very important joint session of the Parliament today. We have been discussing the joint session and of course the related bills in our show for quite some time now. The joint session happened today and the government was able to pass all of the bills, including the EVMs and the I-voting, which of course was saw a lot of controversy and especially the opposition stance as well. There was much drama also at the Parliament session as well from the opposition side. However, nonetheless, the bills have been passed, and now we move on to the next step as to how to implement them and to ensure the transparent system in the country progresses, and that the bills, the purpose for which they were passed, actually meet the right end. What sort of the future we see in terms of these bills and the opposition stance, and also the kind of victory today was for the government are some of the areas we will be looking at in today's discussion. We will also be taking a look at the latest situation in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. We've seen that atrocities have seen no end in the Indian side, and we've also seen that, of course, the Modi regime has continued to militarize the zone. The people of the occupied valley have suffered immensely. We have seen that in a recent spate of violence, many people were labeled as terrorists. Many civilians were killed, and this time around 4 of them were killed as part of an operation in Srinagar. The families have been protesting in the illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and they've been calling for the bodies of their loved ones to be given to them for burial, while the police has refused, citing law and order concerns and also COVID concerns. Of course, the atrocities in Kashmir have continued for a long time, but the kind of situation that we're seeing in terms of human suffering and the violation of religious rights is quite unprecedented. Every time it's a shocker. So we'll discuss that in further detail regarding what really needs to be done about it, and how to bring India as part of the consequence for its actions. We'll start off our discussion with the joint session of the Parliament, of course. We have been joined by Mr. Farooq Matafi and Raja Faisal, as always. Thank you very much for joining us. In our first session, we will be taking a look at the joint session of the Parliament and, of course, all of the bills that we have discussed earlier as well that have been adopted, and what sort of a historic day today was for the government. Faisal, we've discussed at length that today's session and the adoption of these bills really prove the government's strength, the government's stronghold, and of course its power that seemed to be pointed as shaky by the opposition, or the opposition stance coming forward, that perhaps the ruling government has something to worry about. Those concerns and rumors have been put to bay today, don't you think?
Yes, Sana, and I think it was a remarkable day for the government as well. Not only for the government, but Pakistanis throughout the world. I mean, Pakistanis throughout the world, they are jubilant. The overseas Pakistanis, of course, because it's a big day for them, and it's a historic day for them. And from now onwards, whatever they have to say about Pakistan, they can actually document it, and they can be part of the system, the electoral system, the way they have always wanted. And I think it would not only give strength to our our governments, but our electoral system as well. Our governments would be more recognized, more accepted, and democratic aspect of our government. It would be appreciated and accepted throughout the world, and especially the Western countries. We know that majority of the countries of the world, the overseas citizens of them, they are allowed to vote for them, and I think it was a big day for overseas Pakistanis and Pakistan's democracy as well. And more important thing is that once again, while everyone was talking about government being a very weak government and the government losing its confidence with its allies, I think whoever was talking about these things, they need to rethink about their sources, because government have once again proven everyone wrong, and they have proven this, that they are intact with their allies, and allies are happy with them. And today was a very important day for the government.
Right. Of course, the opposition had its own viewpoint, and we will try and deconstruct that to try and figure out exactly which parts are acceptable and which ones are not valid. Farooq, considering the fact that, of course, this was an important part of this entire debate, that whether or not these bills are going to be passed or not, and that part seems to be fulfilled, and the government has emerged victorious. But a larger part, of course, concerns whether or not the parliamentary process has been respected, whether or not that has gone forward the way it should have been. The opposition, of course, keeps pointing out to the fact that a consensus or a real or sincere effort towards establishing a consensus was not there. Considering this reservation of the opposition, can we fully say with confidence that today's victory has much to rejoice?
Right. Thank you, Sana. And I must compliment you for actually taking a question out of my mind and stating it. I felt that you are actually saying exactly what I wanted to comment on. But while I do, and it is particularly about Parliament, which is a sense or the pivot of our democracy, let me point out that my answer has nuances. So don't judge that comment on the basis of only one part of it, right?
No, absolutely.
And there are three things. First of all, I have to actually share with you my annoyance at how the entire proceedings were covered by the entire country's media. And I'm saying this because, unfortunately, today I kept on looking, scrambling to find the list of laws that are being presented, right? And initially, we knew EVMs are going to be debated. We knew or voted on. We knew that expatriates are going to be actually included in this as well. A couple of others, for example, the amendment to the rape law and certain criminal laws were on the table. But I kept on struggling, Sana, and it was really frustrating that none of 50 channels was even mentioning the list. And then I went to the websites of our parliament, that is National Assembly's website and Senate, and I had to actually point out that they are not very accessible either. So I hope that in coming days, because a sense of democracy and journalism is that you cover everything in detail, especially granular detail. And there are at least 29 bills that were passed today. But if you actually look at the nitty-gritty, the list goes to 60 to 70, and that is not a small one, right? And they're all important. Now, let us talk about opposition and how it was reacting, and whether it was only government's success today, or whether it was a great moment of redemption for the Parliament of Pakistan, which has not been able to deliver over past 3 years on anything substantive. I think today was a great day that Parliament showed us that it can, if it wants to, pass a long list of bills which are very important, right? For example, Kulbhushan Yadav's case, ICJ is very important aspect. We made certain commitments and we had to do it, right? Similarly, State Bank of Pakistan's autonomy. This is also a very serious issue, and we have been talking about this for quite some time. These issues were focused, passed today, and I'm really grateful. Even if the opposition doesn't realize it, it is their success also, because all of them are sitting in one boat called the Parliament. And if the Parliament cannot show you any success for 3 years, then it actually attracts a lot of negative attention, right? Finally, when you look at the various nitty-gritties, there are questions. For example, regarding EVMs, today I heard federal ministers, particularly information minister, saying that the bill actually incorporates the reservations or the concerns that were flagged by the Election Commission, over 30 of those concerns.
Right.
If that has been done, we are just going to wait and see how the election commission actually responds. If it is positive, then everything is made. We should be very happy because we have moved up a step further.
Right. I also want to understand, of course, one of the opposition's reservations was regarding the rules of procedure and the conduct of business, regarding the majority of both the members of DNA and the Senate to be the whoever are part of it to actually pass the bill in the joint session. But then the Constitution has states that the number of people that are present in the joint session, the majority of those are enough to pass the bill, and this is what the Speaker also ruled. Help me understand why this contradiction actually exists in the first place, and how is it that we have two different sets of rules, and then how does one take precedence over the other? Faisal, can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, I think initially they were saying that you need to have 222 votes, whereas we saw that the government, it had 221 today, and there was only one vote, but government maintained that it was the fair majority and that was required to pass the bills. And I think as Farooq has mentioned rightly, that it is a day even the opposition benches, they should be proud of. Why? Because end of the day, what is their work? Their work is to come in the parliament and legislate for the people of Pakistan, and the will of the people should be that they come to parliaments and they go through the system and they legislate for the larger interest of the people of Pakistan, and that's what has happened today. And if they are not feeling proud of it today, maybe in coming future they will be feeling proud of it, that this was as we know that the government it was considered as a government which is sitting the benches, the treasury benches, of course it's a alliance, and in that alliance there was always sort of it was talk of the capital town that it is really hard for the government to run its affairs, but they have proven that they are able enough to legislate for the people of Pakistan. And what I see it as, that in coming future we will be seeing more of the initiative taken by the government, and not only the government. I believe the opposition parties, they should come up with different issues that needs to be addressed, and I think this is how the parliament must work on, and this is end of the day, this is what they are there for.
Right. But if that is so, then why is there a need for a consensus in the first place? If we can pass the bills with the majority in the joint session, and if this precedent has been set that without or with the reservations of the opposition, without reaching a consensus, the government is able to pass these bills, and if that's a victory of the parliament, then why is this that there's this moral obligation to get a consensus in the first place?
Right. But this is a very good question, and let me compliment you once again for the question you put to Faisal, because there is a technical answer to that as well. And before me is the Parliament Joint Sitting Rules 1973, right? And in this, there is very clear, statement that the total number of MNAs and senators who are registered, who are there, will be counted, right? Remember, at this moment, one seat is absent. That is Ishaq Dar's seat. Ishaq Dar was elected at the start of the term, but then he was suspended. So the total number is -1. So, and there are other lawmakers who could not actually make it. So what happens is that first of all, the first priority is that the total number of members are actually counted, and their majority has to do it. Then if it cannot happen and there are technical reasons, then the majority of the present are counted, right? That has been done, and we saw the total number, and the government very conveniently, very comfortably passed it, despite repeated urges of the opposition to recount, and they kept on recounting as well. But the second aspect, you were talking about consensus. Look, consensus is something which is basically a figment of our imagination. Who doesn't like for everybody to actually agree?
Right.
You, I, and Faisal, we three people are sitting here. If we start to agree or start agreeing on everything, then the program can no longer be called a debate.
Absolutely.
Right? The humble summation at this moment is that the opposition has been dropping the ball, and I tell you what is happening. After today's vote, what happened? The opposition said that it will move the courts, right? And privately, when you talk to them, they keep on whispering that there is going to be a change in one of the very important posts within 6-7 days, and after that, perhaps the circumstances will change, and then they can do whatever they want.
Right.
The problem and my frustration as a voter is that our politicians keep on losing their own power. They keep on handing it over to the court, to other powers that might be, by actually not doing enough. I tell you, for example, there are many important issues that could have been flagged or discussed. For example, yesterday, if you remember, Faisal was talking about the expatriates and they being given the right to vote. There are so many nuances here that people don't realize. How many of whom will be voting where, right? City of origin, if you have property somewhere, what happens to that constituency? And then there is one suggestion that they should have their own seats. For example,
Right.
Europe should have 1 seat or 2 seats or a certain number of seats. America should have this many, and the Middle East should have it. Then there is a question, and flatness of debate in this country is so amazing, or discourse, that nobody talks about the consequences. If I'm voting and if I make a bad choice, I'm here to face the consequences for 5 years. If a bad government is there and because of my vote it is there, I will be suffering because of their bad policies. If I'm expatriate, my bad decisions will have consequences not for me but for others. So these are very important nuances, but nobody wants to debate them. Because I have just highlighted that flatness of reporting, flatness of discourse, flatness of debate, and then an opposition that keeps on dropping its own ball in the hope that the Election Commission, that the Supreme Court of Pakistan, and the powers that be, quote unquote, will actually decide or help them out. If
Right.
you are not going to do your job, who else will?
Right, and it's of course extremely important, something that we have discussed earlier as well, that the implementation of these reforms and how to take this forward and then actually get the kind of success that you want, then is far more important than the discussion of whether or not these bills are passed or not. But however, having said that, does it not pave the way towards trying to get towards a situation where the bills that have been passed, especially with regards to EVMs and I-voting, actually can be implemented or adopted in a way that is beneficial to the democratic or electoral process of the country? If there are problems in the way that these are going to be applied, are those problems all not the ones that can be resolved, or are there serious hard limits in this adoption of this measure itself inherently, that the bill itself is a problem? Faisal, I don't know if I've made my point clear.
You have. Sana, I think the opposition parties, they have been highlighting the issues with the EVMs, and they have been, highlighting them. But I have, I'll obviously say it with confidence. My sources, they tell me that while all of this debate was going on, the institutions who were supposed to work on them, they have been working on them day and night.
Okay.
And now, obviously, we understand that the opposition, it has already said that they will be standing with the ECP, Election Commission of Pakistan, and on this issue. But I think they need to know, they need to understand as well that the homework by the government with the help of institutions, it was already done, and very soon we will be seeing that the issues and the problems the opposition was highlighting in past, they will be covered very soon. So I think government has a plan, and they will work along that plan, and very soon we'll be seeing that the issues will be resolved, and somehow, as Farooq has mentioned, that the opposition, they need to adjust themselves and they need to empower Parliament rather than standing somewhere else. They need to stand with their own Parliament, because this is where they belong. And if there is something or some decision which is coming out of Parliament, then rather than taking it somewhere else, and they should be committing themselves to that and honoring that decision rather than going somewhere else. So to me, I think the issues which were highlighted by the opposition parties, they will be covered very soon, and that's not a big deal. And once again, I would reiterate that this is a massive decision, a historic decision. Why I keep on saying this, that in past we know that our democracies, they were considered as very weak democracies. This aspect that includes the overseas Pakistanis as part of the electoral system and part of the democracy, it would actually strengthen Pakistan's democracy, especially when it comes to the Western world. In the Western world, when they will see that Pakistan's democracy includes its overseas citizens as well, and of course it would be easier for Pakistan to have friendly lobbies in the Western world as well. And I think it's an amazing decision, and it would bring many fruits in the coming future.
Right. Considering the fact that the opposition, of course, put up a lot of hue and cry before this joint session and talked about many of these bills, and now that we've seen that the bills has passed, and if this has happened according to the constitution and according to all the legalities, then what sort of an option does the opposition have now to challenge such a decision? Can they take any legal route through this, and then on what basis can they do it? If all of the parliamentary procedure has been taken into account, then what is left?
Right. I assume you are asking me, right?
Yes, Farooq.
Okay. Regarding this aspect, remember, I'll have to actually start indirectly, but I have to actually remind you, perhaps it hasn't happened to you, but it has happened in my life time, when there came opportunities or moments when I realized that I've lost all agency. I've lost all choices and somebody else is dictating the terms, right? That happens. Why does that happen? I don't blame that person who is dictating the terms. I ask myself, why is it that I have totally lost agency and lost all the options, right? This is exactly what the opposition must ask itself at this moment. Why is it that despite having such a number in the parliament, and remember it is a hung parliament, in Senate they are actually a majority, not a minority, they ended up in a position where they cannot do much. It is because of their own flawed politics. For example, I didn't ask Maryam Nawaz to actually stand outside and talk to media right when Shehbaz Sharif is delivering his speech on the floor of the House. It was a split screen moment when Chacha is saying something on television, and his own Bhatiji is actually eating up his time, right? On air, because on television you cannot have two sound streams, you have to have one. Similarly, when you talk about People's Party, there too the biggest problem is this decision of who is going to actually decide whether it is going to be Zardari Saab or Bilawal Bhutto Zardari or somebody else. It hasn't been settled. So when you keep on dividing yourself, this will happen. To answer your main question, I remind you that today Bilawal Bhutto Zardari has said that they are going to go to the courts. But the problem is that when you don't have agency, what you are going to do is you are going to actually spend a lot of time speculating and pinning hopes on things that are not in your hand. For example, you keep on saying that there is going to be some kind of dramatic shift in next week. What if it is not in your favor? What happens then? And the judiciary, if it doesn't decide in your favor, what happens then? So this is the whole point.
Right. Much, of course, needs to be seen regarding that. And of course, It is a historic day for the government, but there is a lot that needs to be done from the government side as well. And we hope that these bills are actually implemented and the success or the benefit that we're looking for is actually delivered to the masses. We'll move on to our second segment, which is with regards to the violations in Kashmir, the atrocities that have been committed by the Indian forces and have been going on for many, many years now. And of course, recently also we've seen that civilians labeled as terrorists have been killed. The families have been rejected their right to burial, and they have been protesting. They also called for protests today. And of course, the violation of religious rights continues, among other things, in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. To talk more on this, we have been joined by political strategist Sheni Hamid, and we've also been joined by former Ambassador Dr. Jamil Khan. Thank you very much for joining us in the show, The Debate. I'll start with you, Ms. Sheni, considering, of course, that you have worked with many different organizations, key decision makers. You've been involved with a lot of people who have the power to influence decisions. Considering what has been going on in Kashmir for the past 7 decades, we've seen that the sufferings not only continue, they also continue to increase. And the plight of the innocent Kashmiris largely have not been taken very, very seriously, or nothing concrete has been done with regards to ending their suffering. What sort of push does the international community require for them to be able to do some action which actually makes a difference in the lives of the people of Kashmir?
Thank you very much, my dear honorable friend and all my friends. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First of all, I would like to remind everyone the plain definition about the word of terrorism, which simply explains as the unlawful use of violence and intimidation, especially against the civilians, in the pursuit of political aims. Now, going back to your question, my honorable friend, now we need to see all these latest developments and happenings in Kashmir once more with the definition of the terrorism, with understanding the agenda of the colonialist power, aka India's current admin force, upon the civilians in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Then we also need to remember the frustration of the civilians in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir who are facing various forms of human rights abuses and under the occupying forces every day and every time facing an abuse without really having a chance to stand for themselves. This does cause more disturbance, of course, and for the innocent rights to defend themselves when it comes to an act. But alas, the occupying forces now have a bigger power and international jurisdiction over the matter. So then, when vulnerable victims in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, like the latest clashes happening, when this comes to light, without actually harming to anyone, when they speak for themselves, if this has become an act of terrorism, this is not an acceptable form. And if this is being declared as causing disturbance by the occupying power, this is also not an acceptable form. And if this triggers more clashes and disturbance in the area, and when they are being labeled as terrorists or people who are simply looking for their rights, causing disturbance, this is also not an acceptable form. So, the innocent matter about seeking for their natural human rights and for the locals, when it becomes suddenly an act of disturbance or terrorism, this is not an acceptable form. So only thing is, what we can see is the little label caused by the Indian occupying forces under the act of terrorism, and for Kashmiri brothers and sisters, when they defend their human rights, they are causing disturbance. No, this is not an acceptable form. So,
Right.
in fact, when they bring their Indian occupying forces, Armed Forces Special Powers Act, in order to shut our brothers and sisters when they defend their human rights, this is not an acceptable form. So, in fact, India's Armed Forces Special Powers Act does generously grant special powers to the Indian armed forces to maintain public order in disturbed areas. But with what's happening so far does indeed bring various questions to the minds, like the paradox of I highlighted just above, and which not very different than whether we are really looking for peace or just looking for providing order in the area. And the problem is here. According to the Disturbed Areas Act of 1976, once one area declared disturbed, the area has to maintain status quo for a minimum of 3 months. And Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, this has passed more than 3 months, so almost more than 2 years. So the paradox is, as I highlighted above, when the citizens are looking for their human rights, natural human rights, and asking for the Geneva Conventions and Genocide Conventions for being fulfilled in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, this should not be counted as act of terrorism.
Right.
In fact, we need to think about one little simple fact. Who is causing this real disturbance in the main area, and why they are causing this real disturbance in that main area, and why they are keep bothering the naturally living, happy-going, innocent citizens, and for which agenda? And if we are talking about the Road and Belt Road Initiative, and if we are talking about a bigger agenda of government of Modi, well, who is really causing this disturbance in the area? That's a bigger question. And
Right.
when people are standing for their rights in the area, why we should be really needing to answer for terrorism or defending our rights? That's the
Right,
bigger
absolutely.
question.
Chenny, but Chenny, help me understand one thing. When we say something is not acceptable, I understand that we means that if it happens, it is not going to be accepted, which means there is going to be some sort of consequence. But where is the consequence?
I'll tell you what is the consequences. Okay, India today is member of United Nations Security Council, is a signatory of the Geneva Convention, is a signatory of the Genocide Convention, right? And is the signatory, United Nations itself is clearly stating about human rights and all the democratic rights itself. And all the member countries of the United Nations are talking about the human rights. But when we look to a bigger agenda, all these countries are members of several pacts, several formations, several trade, and well, let's just go back to Road and Belt Initiative formation, right? Well, is it a bigger agenda in this formation? Well, it is. And where Kashmir stands at the moment is a really crucial point. So consequences is low. So since every country is signing signatory of some human rights agreements, signing for a lawful agreements, and if every country is just a member of some humanitarian formation, so Since we are talking about that, consequences should come back to them as the formation and indication and application of law. So why we are
Okay.
not seeing that? That's the bigger question, isn't it?
Absolutely. Okay. All right. Let's take Dr. Jameel Khan in the conversation as well. Thank you for joining us on the debate. Considering what we've discussed so far, and of course, the definition or the labeling of a terrorist, who really is a terrorist, may be easy to put on paper, but we've seen that there are the definitions or these lines are blatantly blurred in actuality, and how things actually turn out, and they've been done so in the past, not just in India, anywhere else in the world as well. And we've seen that whenever any side puts a label of a terrorist on somebody, it's far more complex and difficult to be able to dissect these definitions and figure out whether or not who the real culprit is over here, even though the truth may be staring you in the face. So, Dr. Jameel, how will the understandings of what really terrorism is, who really is a terrorist, is going to help us in this situation, or help the people of Kashmir?
Oh, that's very clear. In fact, under the international law, it's very clear. In fact, and if we only pursue two reports of the Human Rights Commissioner, one of the reports, once Human Rights Commissioner presented, it was with the rolling tears on his cheeks. And all what is being discussed here, and all what Ms. Ahmed has said, most of these points have been covered in those two commission reports. And who doesn't know that the killing in last about 20 years, more than about 100,000. Who doesn't know the custodial killing, the extrajudicial killing is more than about 10,000? And who doesn't know that civilian arrests are more than 200,000, and who doesn't know? Women widows during this time is more than about 35,000, and children orphaned about 150,000. These are the figures already reported. And women gang rape about more than 25,000. Everyone knows that, and it's the recent report of United Nations after the two reports which I just mentioned. And I'm coming on your question direct, why the labeling of terrorism is going on by the Indian side. So basically, let me first describe to you that the international law is very clear. Why it's not being implemented? I would say that the Kashmiris and the Kashmir problem has become the victim of international politics. And once I say so, that I mean that the India being prepared to become a counterweight against China. India has a couple of agreements with very powerful countries like United States. So some of those invisible supports, which rather visible support now is being extended to India. Now, what could be the consequences? Consequences are given in the United Nations Charter, Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. If Chapter 6 has not been invoked as yet, probably I don't know whether the world would be able to put its pressure, or the prescribed procedure of the United Nations Security Council could be invoked to present it as an agenda point and have the Security Council resolutions implemented. And Ms. Hamid was just mentioning it's Geneva Convention, Geneva Convention number 49, Resolution 49, which clearly stipulate about the occupying forces that they would not change democracy, they would not do the atrocities, they would not do the illegal activities there, and they have turned it into a prison there. Now, Geneva Convention, it further goes on to say that the additional protocol of that is paragraph 20 or Article 20C, and it says that any change in demography or any change in the occupying area by force would tend to amount to the war crime. And there, the statute of war crime, Article 8, is applicable. Now, the bigger question, all of us probably we ask ourselves why it's not being implemented. And
Exactly.
as I said, the Kashmir issue has become the problem, the victim of the international politics, and they are about the terrorism. In fact, if we go through the General Assembly Resolution 2649, they are the freedom fighter. I have been working for United Nations also I've been interacting with certain freedom fighters like Shrana Gozmao of East Timor, and he himself would take the name of Kashmiris and say that, and would say that it's Kashmiris are the freedom fighter and not the terrorist. Even Nelson Mandela had raised voice about the Kashmiris. So why it's not happening? It's not happening because the bigger powers and those who can take the resolution to the Security Council, make it an agenda, get the Security Council resolution passed under Article 36 and 30 and Chapter 7 for the implementation. Everything can happen, but it's not being happened because there are a lot of vested interest in the area. But if they only go through the dossier which we have submitted last year in December, 9th of December, and the dossier which we just submitted last month, those dossiers contain volumes of evidence of what is going on in Kashmir and how they are doing this extrajudicial killing, how they are cordoning, how they are arresting people, and how they are killing them, and not even giving the bodies of those people to their heirs. And what to
Right.
talk of them? Their leader, Mr. Gilani, Sayed Gilani. Even what had happened during that time, we all know about it. So,
Right, but Doctor-
basically, UN, yeah.
Right, but Dr. Jameel, considering the fact that, as you just said, and as we all, I'm sure, understand, that a lot of these resolutions and these laws are there on paper, but there are bigger forces into play that, of course, decide the path of different things and how things are going to move forward and what has been going on for so long. So if that is true, irrespective of whatever's written on paper, whatever actually happens is a result of something completely different, what sort of a value does the dossier that we have presented or any of the other documents that we present going to hold in light of the other forces that are actually deciding the future course of action?
No, there could be some other considerations that they are not really considering the solid evidence. Okay, what to talk of Pakistan's dossier, although it contains such heavy and such important and cogent evidence. At least they should consider the Human Rights Commissioner's two commission reports in which he has asked for the investigation. And that investigation under Charter, United Nations Charter Article 36, that's not being acceded to by India. And no one is really, the world community, we know that India is signatory of all these international laws, including Geneva Convention, which I just mentioned. India is signatory of war crime. India is signatory of most of the international instruments, but it's just violating, and it's violating because they know that in the Security Council, India has the supporters, and Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter cannot be implemented on it. If that is implemented, I think that problem would be over within days. The international politics, as I said, has made Kashmiris a victim of it. And we know that we are sitting on volcano, and our Prime Minister has mentioned it, that the two nuclear states, we are just having this issue which is a flashpoint. And the international law continues to be violated. Human misery continues to take place. And
right, absolutely. Point taken, Dr. Jameel. We're
and
almost out of time. I'll just take quick comments from Shani. Shani, just a quick comment, since we're almost out of time and we'll have to end the discussion soon.
Yes, thank
Anything
you very
you would like
much.
to add?
Thank you very much indeed. And in my opinion, international trade agreements and international members of the Road and Belt Initiative is standing against that all democratic forces and against the rights of the local citizens in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, because in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, the area is a very crucial place, and all is a very good place for the people to have a great benefit out of this international trade. And what we need to do is we need to remind to United Nations Security Council that India is a signatory of the Geneva Convention. India is signatory of the Genocide Convention, and we need to remind everyone that Disturbance Act is actually caused by the Indian government itself against the local citizens in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and we cannot just go and disturb local people and occupy their rights and disturb their human rights and just go and say everyone in the world that we are standing against terrorism. That is not fair. So
Right,
to
thank you
all
very
world,
much.
we need to stand against that abuse. Thank you very much indeed.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Shani Hamid, for joining us, and thank you, Dr. Jamil Khan, for being with us
Thank
on
you.
the show, The Debate. Farooq and Faisal, you heard the discussion. Your analysis on what we've discussed so far, particularly with regards to the definition of terrorism and with the ease that the Indian forces can label civilians as terrorists and then move forward.
All right. Do you want us
Farooq, go
both
ahead.
to simultaneously
No,
talk,
no,
or I
Farooq,
should start
you go
first?
ahead.
Okay. First of all, our two guests and also Faisal are specialists, experts, right? I'm a journalist with a G, but I will point out certain obvious things which are very important right now and which actually take you back to the bigger picture, what is going on. Recently, I've been part of, I've attended many international seminars on the plight of Uyghur Muslims, right? And then I've seen many books and a lot of talk as well. And yet I haven't seen more than one or two pictures in which people are basically sitting in jumpsuits and they're saying harrowing pictures. And I give you 4 pictures right now. Yesterday, a video of a child, 13-year-old child, who's crying out loud, and she's saying that they killed my father in cold blood. And then they were laughing when I was protesting. Then another picture of a toddler who's sitting on the dead body of his grandfather. And then, if you remember, when they started using pellet guns, a girl whose entire face was disfigured because of the use of pellet guns. She wasn't a terrorist, right? And then the picture where a voter has been strapped to the front of or bonnet or front of a jeep, and there he is also being shown as a human shield.
Right.
When you look at all these things, you realize India actually wants to get away with whatever it wants, and then it wants the world to actually develop a blind eye. And yesterday, when we were talking about S-400, I was wondering whether whether S-400 system protects India from the near suicidal policies of Narendra Modi, because it doesn't. And we have seen that they have been repeatedly trying to become status quo powers, and yet they want the system to develop exception towards them, and by doing that, actually undermining the status quo of international relations.
Right, Faisal, quick comments.
Sana, to me, I think all of the worthy guests, they have already highlighted related to the subject. But to me, importance I want to give it to is we know that the world only is giving importance to the economic endeavors as well as the strategic depth of the region. They need to think beyond that. They need to think towards the humanity. They need to think about it that there are humans living in Kashmir, and the way they are living right now, I mean, it is the most militarized zone of the world, and we know how hegemonic India is, and we know how rogue Indian military is, and how they are treating to the innocent Kashmiris. And yet another example of yesterday, when 4 other people, they were
Right,
they were
of
brutally murdered in daylight, and nobody was there to save them. I
Right.
think world needs to play its role, and United Nations needs to play its role.
Absolutely,
May
much
I
needs to
add
be done.
one-
Farooq, we
one
are
line,
absolutely
one
out
line,
of time.
With your permission, just don't lose hope, because international community can do a lot, and it will.
Of course, and hope is all we have, but we really need action as well, because of course we know what is going on is not right, but we don't know the kind of sufferings that the Kashmiri people have been going through for so long. We can only imagine, but they're the ones who are suffering at the moment, and their suffering continues as we speak. So we must do something about it with an urgency that is unprecedented. Thank you very much for joining us on The Debate.